The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the artillery range at Shoeburyness, Essex, as Major Richard Thornton approached the gun that had become legend on every battlefield where it appeared. It was early autumn, 1943, and this 88mm Flak 36, captured intact in North Africa, along with its complete fire control system and ammunition stores, represented the weapon Allied soldiers feared most. Thornton had served with British artillery since 1939. He'd witnessed the Stukas over France, survived the desert campaigns, and heard countless reports from tank crews who'd watched their Matildas and Crusaders torn apart by this gun's flat trajectory shells. The 88 had achieved mythical status. German propaganda called it the ultimate expression of Krupp engineering. Allied intelligence briefings treated it as the benchmark against which all other anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapons were measured. But as Thornton circled the weapon, noting its clean lines and robust construction, he carried with him something that would shatter assumptions on both sides of the Atlantic. Detailed performance specifications for America's 90mm anti-aircraft gun, a weapon most British and German officers knew little about. The testing program that was about to unfold would reveal an uncomfortable truth. The legendary 88, while indeed formidable, had already been surpassed by a weapon designed in a nation that had entered the war with virtually no modern anti-aircraft capability. The Americans, starting from nothing in 1940, had somehow leapfrogged German engineering in just 3 years. But this discovery would remain largely unknown outside technical circles, overshadowed by the 88's fearsome reputation and the fog of war propaganda that surrounded it. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Lieutenant James Caldwell was the first to examine the 88's breech mechanism that morning. As a gunnery officer who'd trained on British 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns before the war, he understood the mechanical principles that made rapid-fire artillery effective. The smell of gun oil and cordite residue still clung to the German weapon, evidence of its combat service in Rommel's Afrika Korps. His hands moved over the semi-automatic horizontal sliding breech block, feeling the precision of German manufacturing. Everything appeared engineered to exacting standards. The breech opened smoothly. The loading tray aligned perfectly. The firing mechanism showed no signs of wear, despite what must have been thousands of rounds fired in anger. "Thornton?" Caldwell called out, his voice carrying across the quiet range. "The mechanical quality is exactly what we expected. Krupp hasn't lost their touch." What Caldwell had begun to notice, however, would become the first entry in what would eventually grow into a comprehensive evaluation that challenged everything the Allies believed about German anti-aircraft superiority. The 88's rate of fire, legendary though it was, had physical limitations built into its design. The horizontal sliding breech, while reliable, required more mechanical movement than newer vertical designs. The manual loading sequence, even with a well-trained crew, imposed time constraints that no amount of German precision could eliminate. Outside the gun emplacement, Sergeant William Hayes, a mechanical engineer from Birmingham who'd been commissioned to evaluate captured enemy equipment, was examining the gun's traversing and elevation mechanisms with growing interest. The 88 used a complex system of hand wheels and gears to aim the weapon. It was precise, certainly, capable of engaging fast-moving aircraft with remarkable accuracy. But Hayes, who'd recently reviewed technical specifications for the American 90mm gun, immediately recognized a critical difference. Where the 88 relied on manual traverse, requiring constant handwheel operation by 2 crew members, the American weapon employed a sophisticated power traverse system driven by electric motors. "This is 1936 technology," Hayes muttered, checking his notes against the gun's construction. "The Americans have moved beyond this." The observation would prove prophetic. The 88mm Flak 36 had evolved from the earlier Flak 18, itself developed in the late 1920s, when Krupp engineers worked secretly in Sweden to circumvent Versailles Treaty restrictions. The design philosophy emphasized precision engagement of individual aircraft, reflecting air warfare doctrines of the early 1930s, when bombers flew in loose formations at relatively low altitudes. Each 88 was expected to track and destroy targets one at a time through accurate fire, guided by sophisticated optical directors. German crews trained extensively on these directors, learning to calculate lead angles, altitude corrections, and fusing with mathematical precision. The gun itself was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering. Its cruciform base provided a stable firing platform. The long barrel offered excellent muzzle velocity of 820 meters per second with the standard high-explosive shell. The carriage allowed rapid transition between anti-aircraft and direct-fire anti-tank roles, a versatility that made it invaluable on the Eastern Front and in North Africa. But the 88's development had occurred in a specific context. Germany in the 1930s possessed excellent optical technology, precision machine tools, and highly trained workers. What it lacked was electrical manufacturing capacity and the industrial base for mass-producing complex electrical fire control systems. German engineers designed around these constraints, creating a weapon that leveraged their strengths in mechanical precision, while avoiding dependence on electronics they couldn't produce in quantity. The result was a gun that required highly skilled crews to achieve its theoretical performance, crews that needed months of training to master the complex manual fire control procedures. The American 90mm gun had emerged from entirely different circumstances. In 1940, the United States Army possessed virtually no modern anti-aircraft capability. The standard 3-inch gun dated to World War I. American optical fire control systems lagged years behind German equivalents. But America possessed something Germany lacked: massive electrical manufacturing capacity built up through decades of consumer appliance and industrial motor production. American engineers at the Coast Artillery Board and Aberdeen Proving Ground made a conscious decision. Rather than attempt to match German optical precision with undertrained crews, they would leverage American strengths in electrical systems and automation. The 90mm gun, approved for production in March 1940, incorporated powered traverse and elevation from the start. Electric motors driven by generators on the gun mount allowed rapid, precise aiming controlled by a single gunner. The M1A1 director that accompanied the gun used electrical data transmission to coordinate the entire battery. This wasn't just about convenience, it was a fundamental shift in fire control philosophy. By late 1943, American 90mm batteries deployed to Britain were demonstrating capabilities that shocked British observers familiar with both their own 3.7-inch guns and captured German 88s. A 90mm battery could track and engage targets faster, sustain higher rates of fire, and required less crew training than the German equivalent. Yet this information had barely penetrated British or German intelligence circles. The 88's fearsome reputation, built on 3 years of combat success, overshadowed objective technical comparison. As the Shoeburyness testing program began in earnest, Major Thornton assembled a team that would conduct the most comprehensive evaluation of the 88 ever undertaken by Allied forces. The goal wasn't simply to understand the German weapon, but to compare it systematically against American equipment that was arriving in Britain in increasing quantities. The testing protocol was rigorous. They would evaluate rate of fire, accuracy, reliability, crew requirements, and maintainability. They would test under ideal conditions and under simulated combat stress. Most critically, they would compare the 88 directly against test data for the American 90mm gun. The first trials focused on rate of fire, the fundamental metric for anti-aircraft effectiveness. A German-speaking British officer who'd served in Spain during the Civil War assembled a crew trained to German standards. They studied captured training manuals, practiced German crew drill procedures, and rehearsed until they could operate the 88 as efficiently as any Wehrmacht battery. Over 3 days of intensive firing, carefully documented with stopwatches and motion picture cameras, the results became clear. Under ideal conditions with an expert crew, the 88 sustained 15 rounds per minute. During short bursts, highly motivated crews could reach 18 to 20 rounds per minute, but only for brief periods before fatigue set in. The mechanical loading sequence imposed physical limits. Even with perfect crew coordination, the horizontal sliding breech required specific movements. The separate loading ammunition, with its heavy high-explosive shell and brass cartridge case, demanded careful handling. The manual ramming and breech closing added seconds to each cycle. Lieutenant Caldwell, observing the firing trials, with stopwatch in hand, made detailed notes. 15 rounds sustained, 18 maximum burst. This matches German technical documentation precisely. The gun performs exactly as designed. But when Thornton compared these figures against American test data for the 90mm gun, a different picture emerged. The American weapon, with its power ramming system and electrical firing circuits, sustained 20 to 25 rounds per minute under identical conditions. Some crews, particularly those with extensive training, achieved 30 rounds per minute during short engagements. This wasn't a marginal advantage. It was a 40 to 60% increase in firepower. The implications began to sink in during the evening briefing. If an American 90mm battery engaged the same target as a German 88 battery, the Americans would place significantly more shells in the air during the critical seconds when the target was in range. In anti-aircraft warfare, where hitting a fast-moving target required creating a lethal volume of fire, this advantage could be decisive. But surely, interrupted Captain Jeffrey Morris, an intelligence officer attending the briefing, the 88's legendary accuracy compensates for lower volume. It was the question that cut to the heart of the matter. Did the German emphasis on precision fire control outweigh the American advantage in rate of fire? The accuracy trials would answer that question definitively. The following week, the testing team conducted systematic accuracy evaluations. They set up stationary targets at various ranges and elevations, simulating bomber formations at altitudes from 10,000 to 25,000 feet. The 88, equipped with its original Zeiss optics and German-trained crews using proper fire control procedures, performed admirably. At 15,000 feet, they achieved a circular error probable of 35 meters, meaning half of all shells burst within 35 meters of the aim point. This was indeed excellent performance, testament to German optical engineering and the crew's skill. But the comparison data from American 90mm batteries told a remarkable story. Using the M1A1 director with its electrical data transmission, American crews achieved comparable accuracy despite having far less training. The circular error probable at the same ranges was 38 to 40 meters, only slightly worse than the German gun. More significantly, the American system achieved this accuracy while simultaneously maintaining its superior rate of fire. The German system required highly trained crews working in perfect coordination. The American system automated much of the fire control process, allowing adequate results with less training. Sergeant Hayes, analyzing the data, identified the critical insight. The Germans built a system that achieves excellent results when operated by experts. The Americans built a system that achieves good results when operated by anyone with basic training. In total war, the second approach is far more practical. The observation resonated through the British evaluation team. By 1943, both Britain and Germany faced critical manpower shortages. Replacing combat losses and training new crews strained both nations' resources. A weapon system that required months of intensive training to reach full effectiveness was a luxury neither side could afford. America, with its vast manpower pool and industrial training capacity, could absorb the training requirements. But even American planners recognized the advantage of systems that automated complex tasks. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The testing program moved to reliability and maintainability trials. Here, the 88 showed both its strengths and critical weaknesses. The mechanical robustness was undeniable. Krupp steel, precision machining, and careful assembly produced a weapon that could withstand tremendous abuse. The gun tube itself showed minimal wear even after thousands of rounds. The breech mechanism operated smoothly despite desert sand that had infiltrated every crevice during its North African service. The traversing and elevation mechanisms, though entirely manual, functioned reliably with regular maintenance. But maintenance itself revealed problems. The 88 required frequent lubrication of its complex traversing gears. The cruciform base, while stable, made transport and emplacement difficult, requiring specialized vehicles and considerable time. The optical sighting system, superb in performance, was fragile and difficult to repair if damaged. Most critically, the gun's manual systems demanded constant crew attention. Any malfunction in the traverse mechanism or elevation system required immediate hands-on repair by skilled personnel. Technical Sergeant Robert Macmillan, a mechanical engineer from Glasgow who'd spent the war maintaining British artillery, spent 3 days systematically evaluating the 88's maintenance requirements. His report was sobering. Under ideal conditions with proper tools and trained technicians, maintenance is straightforward. Under field conditions with damaged equipment, battlefield repairs would be extremely difficult. The complexity of the traverse mechanism alone requires workshop-level skills to service properly. When compared against American 90mm maintenance data, the contrast was stark. The American gun's electrical systems, while superficially more complex, were actually easier to maintain. Modular components could be swapped out by crew members with basic electrical training. The power traverse motors, if damaged, could be disconnected, and the gun operated manually as a backup. The hydraulic recoil system required less frequent service than the German spring buffer design. Most significantly, the American gun's design philosophy emphasized field maintainability, with accessible components and straightforward procedures. The mobility trials revealed another dimension of the comparison. The 88, despite its legendary versatility, was actually quite difficult to deploy rapidly. Its cruciform base, while providing excellent stability, required careful setup and leveling. Moving the gun from one position to another, even over short distances, required hitching to a prime mover, a process that took trained crews 15 to 20 minutes. The gun's weight of 5,000 kilograms made manhandling impossible, except over very short distances on level ground. During one trial, they timed a simulated emergency displacement. From the order to move until the gun was ready to fire in a new position required 42 minutes with an experienced crew. This included hitching, movement over 3 kilometers of road, unhitching, leveling, and bringing the gun into action. In rapidly evolving air battles, where German guns needed to reposition to follow bomber streams, such delays could be fatal. American 90mm deployment data showed comparable times for road movement, but the gun's electrical systems offered one critical advantage. Once emplaced, the power traverse allowed the gun to engage targets across a much wider arc without physical repositioning. The 88's manual traverse limited its effective engagement envelope. Beyond certain angles, the crew simply couldn't turn the hand wheels fast enough to track fast-moving aircraft. The American gun's motors could slew the weapon rapidly across its entire traverse range. Major Thornton began synthesizing the findings into a comprehensive report. The picture that emerged challenged comfortable assumptions about German technological superiority. The 88 was indeed an excellent weapon, but it was a weapon designed for a different war. It had been conceived in the early 1930s when air warfare meant relatively slow bombers flying in loose formations at moderate altitudes. German crews with excellent training and optical equipment could engage these targets effectively with methodical, precise fire. But by 1943, air warfare had evolved dramatically. Allied bombers flew in massive formations, protected by sophisticated tactics and electronic countermeasures. They operated at altitudes where optical tracking was extremely difficult. Most critically, they appeared in such numbers that engaging individual aircraft was tactically irrelevant. What mattered was throwing up a barrage of fire dense enough to break up formations and force bombers off their approach paths. The American 90mm gun, designed in 1940 specifically for this modern air warfare environment, simply performed better in these conditions. Its superior rate of fire created denser barrages. Its electrical fire control systems tracked targets more consistently. Its automation reduced crew fatigue during extended engagements. Its maintenance requirements were more compatible with the realities of field operations. But there was one area where the 88 retained a significant advantage: anti-tank performance. The gun's long barrel and high muzzle velocity made it devastatingly effective against armoured vehicles. The separate loading ammunition allowed use of specialised armour-piercing rounds with exceptional penetration. In North Africa and on the Eastern Front, 88s regularly destroyed Allied tanks at ranges where return fire was impossible. Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Brisbane, who'd been sent from the War Office to observe the trials, pressed this point during a briefing. But surely the 88's dual-purpose capability gives it strategic value that outweighs any anti-aircraft deficiencies? Our tank crews are terrified of these guns. Thornton nodded, acknowledging the point. The 88 is indeed fearsome in the anti-tank role, but we must be clear about what we're comparing. As a pure anti-aircraft weapon, which is its primary design purpose, it's inferior to the American 90mm in most meaningful metrics. Its effectiveness against tanks is almost incidental to its original purpose. The discussion revealed a broader truth about German weapons development. The 88's dual-purpose capability had emerged from desperate necessity rather than design brilliance. When Wehrmacht tank units encountered heavily armoured French and British tanks in 1940, German anti-tank guns proved inadequate. Out of desperation, Luftwaffe Flak units began engaging ground targets with their 88s, discovering the guns were highly effective in this role. What followed was improvisation elevated to doctrine. The 88 became the backbone of German anti-tank defence, not because it was designed for this purpose, but because nothing else worked. By contrast, the American 90mm had been designed from the start as a specialised anti-aircraft weapon. When American forces needed improved anti-tank capabilities, they developed dedicated tank destroyers with purpose-built weapons, rather than repurposing air defence guns. This specialization allowed each weapon to be optimized for its intended role without compromise. The metallurgical analysis provided another window into German industrial challenges. Samples of the 88's gun barrel were sectioned and examined under microscope. The steel quality was excellent, showing Krupp's mastery of alloy formulation and heat treatment, but microscopic examination revealed troubling signs. The barrel showed evidence of accelerated wear patterns, inconsistent with the number of rounds documented in the gun's capture history. Metallurgist Captain David Robertson, on loan from Sheffield Steelworks, identified the issue. Availability. The steel composition shows evidence of manganese and chromium shortages. They're trying to compensate with different heat treatment, but it's not entirely successful. This barrel has maybe 5,000 rounds of life remaining, well below the design specification of 10,000 rounds. This discovery confirmed intelligence reports about German industrial struggles. By 1943, the blockade and losses on the Eastern Front were severely constraining German access to critical alloying elements. Even Krupp, with its legendary metallurgical expertise, couldn't maintain pre-war quality standards when raw materials were unavailable. The 88s in service were slowly degrading in quality, even as they maintained their fearsome reputation. American 90mm barrels, by contrast, showed no such compromises. The United States' access to raw materials and its massive steel-making capacity meant gun barrels could be manufactured to specification without cutting corners. Barrel life consistently exceeded 15,000 rounds. When barrels did wear out, replacement was straightforward given America's production capacity. The ammunition trials revealed yet another dimension of comparative performance. The captured 88 had come with several hundred rounds of mixed ammunition types, high explosive with time fuses for anti-aircraft use and armor-piercing for anti-tank engagement. The quality was variable. Some rounds, particularly older stocks, showed evidence of deteriorating propellant. Time fuses, which required precise mechanical timing, varied in reliability. Some functioned perfectly. Others failed to detonate or detonated prematurely. Sergeant Hayes, examining the ammunition, noted the manufacturing marks. These rounds come from at least 6 different production facilities, and the quality varies significantly. The Wehrmacht is clearly struggling to maintain ammunition production standards across its dispersed factory network. American 90mm ammunition, while produced in even greater quantities, showed more consistent quality. Standardized production at a smaller number of large facilities, combined with rigorous quality control, meant shells performed predictably. The proximity fuses being introduced in 1943 added another capability dimension that the German time fuses simply couldn't match. As autumn deepened at Shoeburyness, the testing program reached its final phase: crew training requirements. This would prove to be perhaps the most significant finding of the entire evaluation. A group of British artillerymen with no previous experience on either German or American anti-aircraft guns were divided into 2 teams. One team received instruction on operating the 88 following German training protocols. The other team trained on a newly arrived American 90mm gun using American training materials. The results were striking. After 2 weeks of training, the 90mm crew could bring their gun into action, engage targets, and sustain effective fire. They weren't expert, but they were functional. The 88 crew, despite equal training time, still struggled with the complex manual fire control procedures. Coordinating the multiple crew members required for traverse, elevation, loading, and fusing demanded practice that simply couldn't be compressed into 2 weeks. After 4 weeks, the gap had narrowed but not closed. The 90mm crew had achieved proficiency, consistently hitting targets and maintaining good rates of fire. The 88 crew had improved significantly, but still required careful supervision to avoid errors in the complex fire control sequence. Training officers estimated the German weapon required at least 8 to 12 weeks of intensive training to produce fully capable crews, while the American gun achieved comparable capability in half that time. Captain Morris, observing the curve training trials, grasped the strategic implications immediately. This isn't just about which gun is better in absolute terms. It's about which gun can be effectively employed by the armies we actually have, with the training time actually available. The Americans have designed a weapon system for total war, where rapid crew replacement is inevitable. The observation crystallized the fundamental difference in design philosophy. German engineers, working in a tradition that valued craftsmanship and precision, had created a weapon that rewarded skill and training. American engineers, working in a tradition that valued standardization and mass production, had created a weapon that automated complex tasks and reduced training requirements. Neither approach was inherently wrong, but in the context of 1943, the American approach was far more practical. Major Thornton spent long evenings drafting his final report. The document would eventually run to over 200 pages, with detailed appendices covering every aspect of the comparative evaluation. But he struggled with how to present findings that contradicted firmly held beliefs about German technological superiority. The 88 had become legendary. Allied soldiers feared it. German propaganda celebrated it. Intelligence briefings treated it as the standard against which all other weapons were measured. Revealing that an American gun already surpassed it would challenge comfortable narratives on both sides. The executive summary took multiple drafts before Thornton was satisfied. The German 88mm Flak 36 represents excellent mechanical engineering from the early 1930s. It is a robust, reliable weapon that performs its design function effectively when operated by well-trained crews under favorable conditions. However, comparative evaluation against the American 90mm anti-aircraft gun reveals that the German weapon is inferior in several critical performance metrics relevant to modern air warfare. The American gun demonstrates superior rate of fire, comparable accuracy with less training, better maintainability under field conditions, and more effective automation of fire control tasks. While the 88 retains advantages in certain specialized applications, particularly anti-tank warfare, as a pure anti-aircraft weapon it has been surpassed by American development. The report was classified secret and distributed to a carefully limited audience: senior artillery commanders, war office planners, and liaison officers working with American forces. Its findings would influence British decisions about post-war anti-aircraft development, but would remain largely unknown outside technical circles. The 88's reputation, built on years of combat success, would continue largely unchallenged in popular understanding. In Germany, Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe commanders remained unaware that their legendary weapon had been surpassed. Intelligence reports occasionally mentioned American 90mm guns, but these were dismissed as attempts to match the 88 rather than exceed it. German technical publications continued to cite the 88 as the world standard in anti-aircraft artillery. This confidence wasn't entirely unjustified from a German perspective. The 88 had proven devastatingly effective on every front. Its versatility had saved German forces countless times. From Rommel's desert campaigns to the meat grinder of the Eastern Front, 88s had destroyed thousands of Allied tanks and aircraft. But this combat success masked a crucial reality. The 88's effectiveness came not from absolute technological superiority, but from the skill of German crews, the tactical situations in which it was employed, and simple availability when Allied forces lacked comparable weapons. By 1943, as American 90mm guns began appearing in significant numbers, the balance was shifting. Allied air forces would continue to respect flak defenses, but the supposedly invincible 88 was becoming just another anti-aircraft gun, dangerous certainly, but no longer the technological marvel propaganda claimed. The winter of 1943 brought operational realities that would validate the Schubrinas findings in the harshest possible laboratory. Combat over the skies of occupied Europe. American 8th Air Force bombers were flying deep penetration raids into Germany, facing flak defenses that the Luftwaffe had spent years perfecting. German 88 batteries, deployed in dense concentrations around critical industrial targets, threw up curtains of fire that turned daylight skies black with shell bursts. But American crews reported something that German intelligence initially dismissed as propaganda. The effectiveness of German flak, while still deadly, was not matching the theoretical performance that 88 specifications suggested. Bombers were getting through. Formation integrity was maintained despite intense fire. Loss rates, while painful, were sustainable rather than catastrophic. Something wasn't matching the legend of the invincible 88. German flak commanders understood the problem, even if higher headquarters didn't want to hear it. By late 1943, the batteries defending German cities were staffed increasingly with teenagers, women auxiliaries, and undertrained replacements. The Luftwaffe personnel who'd trained for years on 88s had been killed on the Eastern Front, transferred to new units, or simply worn down by years of continuous operations. The sophisticated fire control procedures that made the 88 effective required crews with experience and discipline that were increasingly rare. Oberleutnant Hans Becker, commanding a flak battery defending the Ruhr industrial region, captured the frustration in his diary. "We have excellent guns, but inadequate crews. My men are boys of 16 and 17. They can load and fire, but the complex calculations for altitude and deflection are beyond them. We fire by barrage now, hoping volume compensates for precision. It is not what our training taught us. but it is all we can manage. The irony would have been apparent to anyone who'd read the Shoebriness report. The 88, designed for precision fire by expert crews, was being used for barrage fire by undertrained personnel. Exactly the mission profile for which the American 90mm gun had been optimized. The Americans had anticipated the realities of wartime operations, while the Germans had designed for peacetime training standards. Meanwhile, American 90mm batteries were proving their worth in a role the designers had never anticipated: coastal defense against V-1 flying bombs. When German V-1 attacks against Britain began in June 1944, 90mm batteries were hastily redeployed from anti-aircraft duties to engage the unmanned missiles. The results demonstrated exactly the advantages identified at Shoebriness. The powered traverse allowed rapid engagement of fast-moving Von Second. The high rate of fire created dense defensive barriers. Most critically, the automated fire control meant even hastily trained crews could achieve good results. British batteries equipped with American 90mm guns destroyed hundreds of Von Second during the summer of 1944. German 88s, had any been available to British forces, would have been far less effective in this role. The manual traverse simply couldn't track the small, fast targets quickly enough. The lower rate of fire would have given each V one more opportunity to slip through the defensive barrage. The June 1944 invasion of Normandy provided another operational test. American forces landing on Utah and Omaha beaches faced German coastal defenses that included numerous 88 batteries in concrete emplacements. These guns, positioned to engage landing craft and aircraft, demonstrated both the weapon's strengths and its limitations. The 88's flat trajectory and high velocity made them deadly against landing craft at medium ranges. Several guns caused significant casualties before being suppressed by naval gunfire. But once Allied forces established air superiority over the beachhead, the German guns' limitations became apparent. The manual traverse made it extremely difficult to track fast-moving fighter bombers making strafing runs. The concrete emplacements, while protecting crews, severely limited traverse arcs. German gunners found themselves unable to engage targets that appeared outside their fixed firing sectors. When the guns were overrun by advancing Allied troops, examination revealed another problem. Ammunition shortages had forced German crews to ration fire, negating whatever rate of fire advantages their training might have provided. By contrast, American 90mm batteries deployed behind the beaches proved highly effective. Their mobility allowed rapid repositioning to meet changing threats. Their powered systems meant crews could engage targets appearing anywhere within their firing arc. Most importantly, Allied logistics ensured unlimited ammunition supplies. American gunners could fire as much as needed without concern for conservation. Technical Sergeant Andrew Morrison, part of an American ordnance team examining captured German positions, reported on the contrast. We found 88s that had been abandoned with minimal damage. Crews had fled not because the guns were knocked out, but because they couldn't maintain effectiveness against our air attacks. Meanwhile, our 90mm batteries were still firing constantly, chewing through ammunition but keeping the sky clear. The Eastern Front told a similar story through different means. German 88s equipped with armor-piercing ammunition remained devastatingly effective against Soviet armor. At Kursk, in July 1943, 88s destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks, often at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. This anti-tank success reinforced German confidence in the weapon's superiority. But this confidence masked a crucial reality that Lend-Lease was beginning to change the equation. American 90mm guns, shipped to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease, began appearing in Soviet air defense networks in late 1943. Soviet crews, training on American equipment with American instructors, quickly discovered advantages the British testing had identified. The electrical systems were more forgiving of maintenance lapses than German mechanical precision. The automated features compensated for gaps in crew training. The standardized ammunition meant reliable supply. Soviet after-action reports, available to Western intelligence, noted that batteries equipped with 90mm guns achieved higher kill rates against German aircraft than batteries using either Soviet guns or captured 88s. The difference wasn't dramatic, perhaps 20 to 30% improvement in most engagements, but it was consistent. More importantly, the 90mm batteries could maintain this performance with crews that received only basic training, while captured 88s required extensive crew familiarization to operate effectively. Major Thornton's report had predicted exactly this outcome. The American weapons design philosophy, prioritizing automation and ease of use, paid dividends when deployed by forces with limited training time and resources. The German weapons design philosophy, prioritizing precision and performance with expert crews, became a liability when such crews were unavailable. The strategic bombing campaign's intensification in 1944 revealed the cumulative impact of these technical differences. As American and British bomber formations grew larger and more sophisticated in their tactics, German flak defences struggled to maintain effectiveness. It wasn't simply a matter of being outnumbered, though that was certainly true. It was that the defenders' weapons and tactics were mismatched to the offensive threat. German 88s, firing methodically under complex fire control procedures, couldn't create the dense, sustained barrages needed to break up thousand-plane formations. Ammunition shortages forced rationing. Crew quality declined as casualties mounted. The optical fire control systems, superb in clear weather, were nearly useless in the smoke and haze that perpetually covered German industrial areas by late 1944. Lieutenant General Adolf Galland, who'd commanded Luftwaffe fighter forces before taking over air defense responsibilities, understood the problem clearly. In post-war interviews, he reflected on the flak arm's limitations. "We had excellent guns, but we were fighting the wrong war. Our 88s were designed to engage individual aircraft with precision fire. The Allies sent formations so large that precision was meaningless. We needed volume, and our guns couldn't provide it with the crews and ammunition we had available." Galland's assessment validated what British testing had revealed. The 88 wasn't a bad weapon. It simply wasn't the right weapon for the war Germany was actually fighting by 1944. American 90mm guns, designed specifically for the high-volume automated engagement of massed formations, were far better suited to the operational reality. The ammunition production crisis deepened these problems. By 1944, Allied bombing had severely disrupted German fuse production. Time fuses for anti-aircraft shells required precision manufacturing of clockwork mechanisms. These facilities, concentrated in specific regions, were vulnerable to bombing. As fuse quality declined and supplies dwindled, even the most skilled 88 crews couldn't achieve effective results. Shells that failed to detonate at the correct altitude were worse than useless. They wasted ammunition and created no suppressive effect. American proximity fuses, beginning to appear in large numbers in late 1944, revolutionized anti-aircraft warfare in ways that made the German time fuse obsolete almost overnight. The proximity fuse detonated automatically when it sensed an aircraft nearby, eliminating the complex calculations required for time fuses. This technology, impossible for Germany to replicate with its industrial base under siege, gave American 90mm guns a decisive advantage. British batteries equipped with American 90mm guns and proximity fuses achieved kill rates against V-1 flying bombs that exceeded 80%. Had German 88s with time fuses been employed in the same role, calculations suggested kill rates below 40%. The technology gap had widened from marginal to decisive. The final months of the war saw German 88s increasingly abandoned or destroyed by their own crews. Not because the guns themselves were failing. Krupp's mechanical engineering remained sound, but because the logistics, ammunition, and trained crews needed to operate them effectively had collapsed. American forces advancing through Germany in 1945 found hundreds of 88s in various states of abandonment. Some had been spiked to prevent capture. Others sat intact but useless for lack of ammunition or crews. Captain James Sullivan, an American ordnance officer cataloguing captured equipment, noted the irony. "We're finding these legendary 88s everywhere, and they're just scrap metal without the support structure to operate them. Meanwhile, our 90mm batteries keep firing because our logistics keep them supplied and our training keeps crews qualified." The contrast illuminated a broader truth about German weapons development. The Wehrmacht had produced numerous technically sophisticated weapons, the 88, the Panther tank, the Tiger, the Type XXI U-boat. But these weapons required industrial and logistical support that Germany couldn't sustain. American weapons, often less sophisticated on paper, were designed from the start to be sustainable in extended operations. This wasn't an accident. It was a conscious design philosophy. As victory in Europe approached, Allied intelligence began comprehensive evaluations of German weapons technology. Teams of technical specialists examined everything from small arms to ballistic missiles. The goal was to identify technologies worth adopting and to understand how Germany had achieved its early war successes despite eventual defeat. The 88 received extensive attention in these evaluations. Multiple reports, from British, American, and Soviet sources, reached similar conclusions. The weapon represented excellent 1930s engineering, but had been surpassed by weapons designed with the lessons of actual combat. Its fearsome reputation exceeded its objective capabilities. Its versatility, while impressive, reflected German industrial desperation rather than design brilliance. One American technical intelligence report stated bluntly, "The 88mm Flak gun achieved legendary status through successful employment by skilled crews in favorable tactical situations during the early war years. Objective analysis reveals it is inferior to American 90mm anti-aircraft guns in rate of fire, training requirements, maintenance demands, and adaptability to modern air warfare conditions. Its continued reputation stems from lag in battlefield intelligence rather than genuine superiority." The Soviet report was similarly direct. German 88mm anti-aircraft gun represents outdated, design philosophy emphasizing individual precision over mass effect. Soviet and American designs correctly prioritize volume of fire and ease of operation. No recommendation to adopt German design features for post-war development. Even the British, who'd captured and tested the 88 most comprehensively, concluded it offered little worth incorporating into future designs. Major Thornton's 1943 report had been prophetic. The weapon's only real advantage, its effectiveness in the anti-tank role, was incidental rather than inherent. Better results came from purpose-designed anti-tank guns rather than repurposing air defense weapons. The post-war fate of 88s told its own story. While thousands had been produced during the war, very few remained in service afterward. Germany's reconstituted military, the Bundeswehr, showed no interest in resurrecting the weapon. They adopted American 90mm guns and later modern systems that incorporated American design principles. The Soviet Union, despite capturing thousands of 88s, made no effort to copy or produce the design. They continued developing their own systems based on wartime lessons that paralleled American conclusions. Several nations that received war surplus 88s as military aid quickly replaced them with more modern weapons. The maintenance requirements and training demands made the guns impractical for smaller militaries. By the early 1950s, most surviving 88s had been scrapped or relegated to museums. The American 90mm gun, by contrast, enjoyed a long post-war career. It remained in U.S. service through the Korean War, where it proved effective against North Korean and Chinese aircraft. Modernized versions with improved fire control continued in service into the 1960s. The basic design influenced subsequent American anti-aircraft weapons, with its emphasis on automation and high rates of fire becoming standard doctrine. More significantly, the design philosophy embodied in the 90mm gun influenced an entire generation of American weapons. The emphasis on automation, ease of training, and operational sustainability became hallmarks of U.S. military equipment. From the M16 rifle to the M1 Abrams tank, American weapons prioritized practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection. The Germans, ironically, learned these lessons thoroughly. When West Germany rearmed in the 1950s, Bundeswehr doctrine explicitly rejected the perfectionism that had characterized Wehrmacht equipment. German military planners, many of them former Wehrmacht officers, recognized that their wartime weapons sophistication had been a strategic liability. The new German military adopted American and NATO standard equipment and emphasized reliability over complexity. Former Luftwaffe officers, when interviewed about their wartime experiences, often expressed frustration with how the 88's reputation had obscured its limitations. One former battery commander stated, "We were told we had the world's best anti-aircraft gun, and we believed it. Only after the war did we learn the Americans had surpassed us years earlier. If we had known the truth, we might have demanded better weapons instead of trying to work miracles with inadequate equipment." The intelligence failure worked both ways. German commanders never realized their legendary weapon had been surpassed. Allied forces never fully internalized that the feared 88 was actually inferior to weapons they already possessed. The 88's reputation, built on early successes and sustained by propaganda, created a psychological advantage that persisted even as the technical reality shifted. This psychological dimension revealed another truth about warfare. Reputation and perception matter as much as objective capabilities. The 88 frightened Allied soldiers because they believed it was superior. This fear influenced tactics, complicated operations, and gave German forces an advantage independent of the gun's actual performance. Had Allied forces known the complete truth that their own 90mm guns were superior, it might have changed battlefield dynamics significantly. Major Thornton, reflecting on his 1943 evaluation decades later, noted this irony. "We proved the 90mm was superior, but the information never reached the troops who needed it. They went on fearing the 88 while their own guns were actually better. In war, what soldiers believe matters as much as what's technically true." The technical intelligence community learned important lessons from the 88 evaluation. Future assessments of enemy weapons would emphasize operational context, rather than specifications in isolation. A weapon's effectiveness depended not just on its design, but on the training, logistics, and tactical employment received. The 88 succeeded in the early war because Germany possessed all these supporting elements. It failed later because these elements eroded, not because the gun itself changed. This insight influenced Cold War weapons assessment. When evaluating Soviet equipment, Western intelligence focused on how weapons would perform under realistic conditions rather than theoretical maximums. The understanding that weapons were systems requiring support, not isolated pieces of hardware, became fundamental to military planning. The 88's legacy thus became more complex than simple technological success or failure. It was an excellent weapon for a specific context, skilled crews, adequate logistics, and tactical situations favoring precision engagement. When that context evaporated, the weapon's limitations became crippling. American designers, consciously or not, had created weapons optimized for worst-case conditions, undertrained crews, strained logistics, and tactical situations requiring volume over precision. The comparison between the 88 and the 90mm gun illuminated broader patterns in German and American approaches to warfare. Germany sought perfection, creating sophisticated weapons that rewarded skill and precision. America sought adequacy, creating simple weapons that functioned reliably in any conditions. In a long war of attrition, the American approach proved decisively superior. As the surviving veterans of 88 batteries aged and their stories entered historical record, a more nuanced picture emerged. The gun was formidable, but not invincible, deadly, but not decisive, well-designed, but not optimal. Its reputation exceeded its reality, a gap sustained by propaganda, imperfect intelligence, and the psychological impact of effective early war employment. The Shoeburyness evaluation, classified for decades, finally became public in the 1970s. Military historians examining the documents recognized their significance. Here was proof that Allied intelligence had identified German weaknesses far earlier than generally realized. The report demonstrated that American weapons development had been more successful than wartime propaganda suggested. Most importantly, it showed that the legendary 88 had been surpassed by American engineering by 1943, 2 years before Germany's defeat. Modern artillery specialists studying the 88 and 90mm comparison draw clear conclusions. The American weapon represented the future, automated, high volume, designed for operators rather than specialists. The German weapon represented the past, manual, precise, designed for craftsmen rather than soldiers. Both worked, but only one was sustainable in modern industrial warfare. The final irony of the story lies in its obscurity. While the 88 remains famous, its legend perpetuated in countless books and films, the superior American 90mm gun remains relatively unknown outside technical circles. The weapon that actually won the anti-aircraft war receives none of the recognition given to its legendary opponent. History, it seems, is written not just by victors, but by those with the best propaganda. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.